Welcome to Ink and Insights, South Asia's premier podcast where ideas meet impact. Today we are honored to host Aoife O'Brien, author of Thriving Talent, How Great Leaders Drive Performance, Engagement and Retention, founder of Happier at Work, and host of the acclaimed Happier at Work podcast. With 2 decades of experience in global corporate roles across FMCG, tech, and data, Aoife had checked every box of success, yet feel unfulfilled and out of place. Recognizing that many others shared this sense of disconnection, she transformed her frustration into purpose. Armed with a master's in organizational behavior and deep expertise in market research, Aoife learns Happier at Work to help leaders uncover what truly enables people to stay, grow, and thrive. Her work focuses on building cultures of alignment, offering meaningful career support, and fostering clear communication so that work can genuinely work for everyone. Aoife, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Ink and Insights.
Thank you so much, Sumit. And might I say, I'm like, who is this person in the introduction? That's a fabulous introduction. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome, Aoife. You have described your feeling unfulfilled despite ticking all the boxes in corporate life. What was the turning point that pushed you toward creating Happier at Work?
Yeah, really good. I think that for me, there were kind of almost 2 turning points. So in one organization I worked in, I was there and within a couple of months, people were approaching me, asking me questions about the software, about the clients, even though they had been there for years. And I thought, wow, I must be doing something right. I was promised a promotion to become a director in that role. And as it turned out, one of my colleagues was actually promoted in my place, but it was never communicated to me. So it kind of gave me an insight into what organizations say and what they do is not necessarily the same thing. So the behaviors don't necessarily match with what they're actually talking about. And that had never happened to me before. I always worked in organizations that were quite positive and transparent. So that was issue number 1. And I left that organization quite soon after that happened. And I took some time out and I traveled quite a lot. And then I took another role in a competing organization later. And I enjoyed the role. And then I didn't. So it was kind of like a roller coaster. And this went on for a number of years. I loved it, then I hated it. I loved it, then I hated it. And in my most recent role, I made an active decision to work in an area. I can see that, when you look back with 2020 vision, I made an active decision to work in an area that wasn't an area of strength or an area of interest, but it got me, from an ego perspective, it got me onto the senior leadership team. And so I took that role knowing that I wasn't necessarily working to my area of strength. But when I look back now, I can see it was very ego driven. And I was offered the choice of 2 different roles. And I went with the role that I thought, this looks great on paper, even though I didn't feel fulfilled. And so after probably maybe a year, maybe even a little bit less than a year in that role, I just had enough. I thought, this is not doing what it should do for me. I don't feel good in this role. And so I left. And that's kind of how it all began in a roundabout way.
Right. Aoife, let's talk about your book, Thriving Talent. What inspired you to write Thriving Talent, and what gap in leadership literature were you aiming to fill?
Yeah, really good question. I think so. A couple of things. Number 1, I had always wanted to write a book, and previously I thought that might be a novel, but alas, it's a business book. And the second one was based on all of the research. So I had these 2 experiences that I described, and I went on after leaving that most recent organization, and I did a master's in organizational behavior. And I asked those hard questions. Why didn't I feel like I really belonged in the area where I worked? Why didn't I feel fulfilled at work? What could the organization that I worked in have done differently to keep me, to help me to stay? And so since doing that research, it's kind of been an evolution. So I came up with this 3-pillared framework about values and needs and strengths. And in the work that I do and the research that I do and the conversations that I have, it's evolved into be a more robust framework. And in terms of the problem that it solves, it's really about creating the conditions where people can do their best work, where they feel fulfilled, where they want to stay, where they feel engaged in the work that they're doing. And the framework looks at psychological safety as the foundation, really the foundation of everything, feeling safe to speak up, feeling that it's okay to challenge the status quo, that it's okay to say what's on your mind. Okay. And then 3 pillars that I had mentioned earlier that I found in my original research, but they had sort of evolved. So when I talked about values later became, well, it's bigger than values. It's the behaviors, it's the beliefs that we have at work. And so I'm calling that workplace culture. And then needs, again, evolved into drivers. So it's not just about need satisfaction, it's understanding what really drives us at our core, but also there are things that may derail us. So we are driven internally, and the example I always think of is the need to be right. So I have this need to always be right. I always have the right answers, and that can actually derail us in our careers, and it's important to understand that. And then on the third pillar was strengths, and now it's about capabilities. So it's not just about understanding individual strengths, it's about understanding complementary strengths. It's about understanding what gets in the way of people being able to use their strengths at work. And this one really resonated with me because that's the experience I had. I didn't feel like I was getting to use my strengths at work. Right. And then the capstone of the model is leadership. So having effective leaders in place to be able to capitalize on those 3 pillars.
Right. So would I be wrong if I say that the core principle of this book is based on the 3 pillars that you elaborated just now?
It's based on all 5. So It's based on psychological safety as the foundation, and then there's the 3 pillars, and then leadership as the capstone. So the book is broken down into 5 different parts. And so those 5 parts come after explaining this is currently what's wrong with work. So there's a lot of things that are wrong. And then there's a lot of interventions that we have at work that aren't working because they're not trying to fix, or it's not clear what they're trying to fix, or we're not measuring what we're trying to fix. And so the interventions that we put in place don't necessarily work to fix the issues that we think they're trying to address. And oftentimes we're addressing the symptoms rather than the root causes of what's happening.
Yeah. Could you share a core principle out of all these 5, if we dig more into the leadership?
Yeah.
Core principle, you believe that every leader should practice daily?
Like practice, something that every leader needs to practice every day.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying? Yeah. So for me, one of the, when it came to the leadership chapter, I kind of went headlong into this is what leaders should do. This, and drawing upon research about leadership. And when I took a step back, I really thought, as leaders, what we need to practice first is self-leadership. So understanding ourselves before we try to support and lead other people. So that's about things like emotional intelligence, building our own self-awareness. I drew upon another fantastic book called I think it's the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, which is about being a more conscious leader, leading from a place of awareness rather than blindly being led by reactions and things like that. So for me, at its core, we need to lead ourselves first, and that happens through self-awareness.
Right. And how do you see performance, engagement, and retention as interconnected rather than separate challenges?
Yeah, really good question. So for me, I think we talk an awful lot about performance, but do we really know what that means? So for me, performance typically is related to money. So how much money, how much return on investment are we getting? How much money are we getting per quarter, per year? And I mean that from a business perspective. So are we meeting our quarterly financial targets, for example? But performance can mean lots of different things. And I think we need to define what that is for us in terms of engagement and retention and how all of those things are interconnected. And I'm glad that you said that. So for me, if we as individuals are not engaged in the work that we're doing, we're less likely to put in discretionary effort. We're less likely to give it our all to really perform at our best. If we think back to the pillars specifically, so if we are not able to use our full strengths, if we're not feeling fulfilled at work, if we're left feeling that we're drained or we're not able to work fully to our capabilities or use our natural strengths, then that will diminish our sense of engagement with the work, and it will have a detrimental impact on our performance in doing the job. Now, if this goes on for an extended period of time, as it did for me, the longer we feel this sense of disengagement or not feeling really connected with the work we're doing, not having the opportunity to fully utilize our strengths, then the more likely it is that we will eventually leave that organization. And it's not always the case that people leave. But you have to think, if someone's not engaged with the work, do you want to keep them in that state of not being engaged? Or is it best if they leave and they're replaced with someone else who is more engaged?
How do you think leaders balance organizational goals with individual employee needs?
Really, again, really good question. So for me, I think one of the core jobs of the leader is translating that kind of at an organizational level. This is what we're trying to achieve. This is why we're here. So what is the purpose of the organization? And also being able to translate that into the individual. So I think at organizational goal level, we need to translate that into departmental level, into team level, and that trickles down to individual level. As a leader, one of the most critical things, I think, is making the connection between what an individual does on a day-to-day basis and what the organization is here to achieve. So an example of that might be something like, let's take Sarah. So Sarah is in this role and she's working and she's getting on and she's doing her job. As individuals, we all have this need for relatedness. So we want to feel connection to other colleagues and something that's bigger than ourselves.
True.
And so Sarah might not see the relationship between what she's doing day in, day out. She's working on spreadsheets. She's dealing with client queries, something like that. Now, as a leader, Sarah's boss can say to her, this is the impact that you're having. So it can be something like, as an organization, we want to improve client experience or client retention. That is like top level organizational goal. That's a priority for us because we know that it results in increased revenue, or it's easier to maintain customers we already have rather than looking for new customers. So as a leader, Sarah's boss can say, well, the work that you do with your clients, the relationships that you've built and the scores that you're getting in terms of satisfaction, that is having a direct impact on our overall organizational goals. So I think having that, understanding that need at a fundamental level, but that's just one of our universal needs that we have. Sarah may also have other specific needs, other unique needs. So one of those needs might be for recognition, for example. So that kind of hits both of those, where Sarah's being recognized for the contribution that she's making, but she's also seeing a direct link on how she spends her time and what she's doing on a day-to-day basis with what the organization is trying to achieve.
तिमीसँग अब धेरै टाइम छैन है, बिहे गर्नु छ भने गरिहाल, नत्र घरबाट मलाई अन्त्य बिहे गर्दिनु।
भर्खर 3 वर्ष भयो एमबीबीएस जोइन गरेको, 5 वर्षको कोर्स हो। के भो? अचम्म छ। एक्सक्यूज मी सर मेरो 5 वर्षको कोर्स 3 वर्षमा सकाउन मिल्दैन?
गेट आउट।
हेलो
के सोच्यो त
के सोच्ने मैले प्रिन्सिपलसँग पनि कुरा गरिसकेँ 3 वर्षमा पनि के हुन्छ 3 वर्षमा
के भयो भाइ ल बस साउजी एक कप चिया कसले भन्यो 3 वर्षमा केही हुँदैन भनेर यो हेर एलआइसी नेपालको धनवृष्टि योजनामा 3 वर्षमा पैसा फिर्ता हुन्छ
ए हो र
जीवन बीमाको साथमा धनवृष्टि 3 वर्षमा एलआइसी नेपालको धनवृष्टि योजना एलआइसी नेपाल.
And, I really liked one line that was used in your website where you have mentioned that work that works for everyone. How do you define work that works for everyone?
Oh, that's a really good, that's probably a whole other podcast episode in itself. But for me, it's work that works for the business. So fundamentally, businesses exist to make money. You wouldn't have a business if we didn't make money. But beyond making money, why does the business exist? And we have to understand a little bit more about that. So I think from a business perspective, so if we're saying everyone, from a business perspective, the business needs to make money. It needs to be performing, but it also needs to be meeting the mission that it's set out for. Because I think businesses that don't have a clear purpose, like they only exist to make money, I don't think you'll get into people's kind of hearts and minds to get behind that and to really buy into why do we exist in the first place. Surely, I would hope that most businesses exist for some reason beyond just money. So working for everyone. So at a business level, it's that. But then when we take it back down to individuals, it's really understanding what fulfills us at work. And I think different people will have different needs in relation to that. So if we think about it working for everyone, we kind of need to look at the entire model. So have we created an environment where it's okay for people to speak up and share what's on their mind, to challenge how we're doing things, to share new ideas and innovations, to improve processes without feeling like they're trampling on someone's toes? So that's kind of fundamentally around psychological safety. But then also, as an individual, are my values in line with the values of the organization? Are what the organization stands for, is it something that I also stand for? And is there a match between those things? I think it's important from that perspective. Excuse me. We talked a little bit about needs and our individual needs. And I think at the individual level, we need to understand what are the things that internally drive each individual to be able to perform at their best. And so that's kind of the next level. And when we feel that sense that our drivers or our needs are being met through the work that we do, then that's something that works better for us. And then the next level up, if you like, is this capabilities. So do I as an individual have the opportunity to do my best work in this organization? Am I using my strengths? Am I stretching? Am I being challenged? And then from a leadership perspective, do I have the leader that I need? Or can I, as an individual leader, lead in the way that I would like to lead? And so for me, when we get those elements all right and all working together, the business is going to perform better. So we're creating the conditions and the business is going to perform. And so for each individual, that will work. Now, the caveat with that is that not every individual is going to be the right match with every organization. I think we need to find what works for us. And it's about recognizing that in ourselves. And then as leaders, recognizing that in other people as well. So this role is not a good fit for this person, or this organization as a whole is not a good fit. How do we work with them to find what's best for them? And so it should be that we are creating the conditions for everyone who works in our organization to really, really thrive.
If I'm sure you have worked with multiple organizations, a lot of organizations, in fact. What has surprised you most in your journey of helping organizations become happier workplaces?
I had the assumption that large organizations had all of this stuff figured out already. that they have their internal supports that they can draw upon. And the reality is most often they don't have this figured out. They're not really thinking on this level. They may have internal supports that are set up, but the vast majority, they're not really thinking about these things. They're very focused on short term, and I was in that position myself where we had the quarterly earnings calls. So we had to report back to Wall Street. And it was very short-term focused. And I think that was the biggest misconception I had was they have all of this figured out. They must be doing something right. But the vast majority have not figured out how to make work for everyone.
Right. And personally yourself, Aoife, how do you personally stay aligned with your own values while running your own business?
Yeah, really good question. I have my values list, like I have them very clearly listed so I can refer back to them. It's not always easy, I have to say. And I think sometimes when I notice that I'm feeling, I won't even say feeling out of alignment because I don't recognize it at first. I just feel like there's maybe an uneasy feeling. And I think there's something not right here. And it's when I do the reflection that I realize, okay, something's not right here because I'm actually out of alignment with my values. I'm doing something, I'm behaving in a certain way that is not in alignment with the values that I have. Yeah. So I think it's through that reflection of noticing when something kind of the gut feel, like you just, something is just not feeling right.
Right. And I'm sure you must have worked with different age groups as well, millennials, Gen Z. How do these generational expectations reshape the conversation around engagement and retention?
Yeah, again, I think it's a really interesting aspect to look at. And I had this conversation on a recent podcast episode that hasn't been released yet. But this idea of the difference in generations, I kind of struggle with it sometimes. So I'll share two different perspectives if you don't mind. So the first is, and I learned this doing my master's. So when I was doing my own research, something they shared was with every new generation that comes into the workplace, into the workforce, we always think that their ideas are new and completely different to what has ever been done before. If I think back to when I first entered the workforce, we probably thought there was a big divide between my generation and the next generation or a couple of generations ahead. So I'm Gen X. I guess that would be like the two ahead would be like the war. I can't even remember what they're called. It's the one before the boomers. Yeah. And we were always told, like, with every generation, there is that kind of challenge, but are we that different from each other? So that was kind of what I learned there was it's not just a generational thing. It's when there are new generations, like each generation has had that same challenge when they enter the workforce. Now, the other perspective on this is it's really positive. I think these younger generations coming in and challenging old work norms and rewriting the script on what work is about. So I think with the advent of being able to work from anywhere, with being able to work remotely, with having mobile phones, which if I think back to when I first started, we didn't have company phones. We weren't accessible. I think I had a laptop, but it wasn't so I could go home and work in the evening. It was so I could go and work with clients. So it wasn't about like being always on. And I think the younger generations are challenging some of those norms that have evolved over time because of the technological advances that we've had. And they're saying, well, why does it need to be that you work all the hours? Can I not have more work-life balance? Can I, I think some of those things that have evolved over time due to having greater access to technology are being challenged by those younger generations. And I think that's a positive thing. And focusing and speaking up about things that we couldn't necessarily speak up about before. There's much more talk about menopause. I'm not saying that's driven by the kind of the Gen Zs and the Gen Alphas, because they wouldn't probably have an appreciation. But I think generally speaking, just speaking about mental health, about work-life balance, about those kinds of things that we've forgotten about. I think it's given permission for us to talk about other things that previously we would never have spoken about in a workplace context. I think we tend to focus on work stuff, and now we're allowed to be a little bit more human when it comes to work and talk about those things that make up the full human and not just the work persona.
Yes, yeah. We kind of focus on work-life balance as well because of this, I guess, this perspective.
Yeah.
Not many things have also changed when we think of the nature of work itself, particularly after COVID. Do you believe remote and hybrid work models have permanently changed the way leaders must think about culture?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I think for me, it's a positive thing because we can work essentially from anywhere. We can work remotely, but it's also a big challenge because, like you say, the culture that we need to focus on, but also, excuse me, again, if I think back to my early career, work was how I made friends. Work was how I had a social life, especially if I moved to a new city. And so, and I still, to this day, one of the things I miss a lot from working, not as part of a big team anymore, is that I don't have that interaction with people. And so I think that's a big challenge. And it makes it a big challenge then for leaders to try and create that sense of connectedness with other people and to maintain the kind of culture that you would get just from sitting in an office and overhearing conversations or seeing how people interact face to face if you're working at home in a remote hub, whatever it might be, that you don't have access just to those kind of informal signals about how things are done in an office. So it's much harder to actively maintain that culture. So I think it's fundamentally changed how we think about work. And I think it's maybe for a lot of individuals, it's put into question, what am I doing here? Or is there something I could do that better serves my purpose or the planet or whatever it might be? But and that's also a challenge if companies are losing people because they want to feel a greater sense of purpose or a greater sense of fulfillment. But I think there are lots of opportunities that go with that as well.
What lessons from your corporate career still influence the way you live today?
Really good question. I think one of my mentors said to me a long time ago, it's more important to be helpful than to be right. And I think that still rings true for me today. So it was in the context of a client, and in the kind of work that I did, a client had a tendency to ask for very specifically what they wanted. So if we had a good relationship, they might give us kind of a broader brief and say, this is the outcome that we're trying to achieve. But in a lot of scenarios, they would just request very specific analyses. And so in that context, you could either respond and do what they've asked for, even if you suspect that maybe that won't help them solve the problem that they're trying to solve, because we were the experts with the software, with the analyses. Or you could question back and try and probe a little bit and see what's the problem that you're trying to solve. And so spending a little time asking questions to be helpful rather than just sending something blindly that they've asked for in a view to, like, this, in this instance, this makes me right because this is what they've asked for, rather than helpful to really probe and see what it is that they're looking for.
Very interesting. It's really useful to be useful rather than,
exactly.
being disengaged. Yes.
Yeah.
My last questions for today's episode, looking ahead, what is your vision for the future of work and how can leaders prepare for it now?
I think the future of work is, well, I think we can't talk about the future of work without talking about artificial intelligence. Right. The future of work for me, and this might be the subject of a future book as well. But for me, the future of work is about impact and relating what we're doing back to the impact that we're trying to have. I think we are so focused on getting things done and being really busy that we very rarely take a step back to think, what should we be working on? In the age of AI, I think when I first started using, I thought brilliant and it's saving a lot of time. Now we have all of the information at our fingertips. It can be so overwhelming because we can do so much with AI that I think it's even more important to take a step back and think, why are we here? What are we doing? Why do we exist? And then on the individual level, we can think, well, how is this serving my objectives, my goals that I'm trying to achieve? At a leadership level, making sure that people are really clear on what those expectations are and moving the focus from the time we invest in work more to the impact that we're trying to have through the work that we do. And I think that will cross industries, that kind of future thinking will cross different industries, different levels. I think it's really important to shift that focus to impact.
So if I, comprehend the entire conversation, I believe there are many other points that you said, but what really touched me at the end is we need to be very careful or be very introspective about the kind of impact that our work is creating in our society, in fact, in the larger societies, right? So on that note, I would really like to thank you for your time, and it was lovely talking with you, Aoife.
Thank you so much, Sumit. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for your very thoughtful questions and the opportunity for me to share what's going on in my mind.
Thanks.